Hello, I am your host, Webster Murimbika. With me here today to discuss the Iron Age of Britain is Lee, a commercial archaeologist and a specialist in the Iron Age of Britain. He is also a project manager for a commercial archaeology company and has worked all over the UK in the recent years. Welcome to the podcast, Lee.
Thank you.
Sure. So before we go any further, can you tell us what the Iron Age was, basically, in general? What period was
it? So basically in Britain, it was basically the start of use of iron became widespread, and that's why it's called the Iron Age. It started around 800 BC and ends in 43 AD with the Roman invasion, when the Romans came over.
It applies to Britain only, right?
I think it applies to Europe basically as well with the Iron Age. It's just the dates are different for when it kind of started.
Okay. So, are there any theories that have been used to explain the Iron Age of Britain?
I mean, so the Iron Age archaeology that I've come across in my work have mainly been Iron Age settlements where people lived. And then a lot of the time in Britain, you get Roman archaeology right next to Iron Age archaeology because the Romans invaded Britain during the time the Iron Age people were living in Britain, like the Britain people. So, for instance, a couple of years ago, I worked on a site, an Iron Age settlement with roundhouses where they would used to live in like these roundhouses that are made out of like mud and straw and wood. And like a couple of meters away, there'll be like a Roman garden or a house. So these people were either living, the Romans and the Iron Age people were either living next to each other, or the Romans took over and invaded if they wanted to, because the Iron Age people, their defensive structures were mainly on hill forts. So they would, have kind of a fort on top of a hill so they could see their surroundings. They could see if anyone's going to come and attack them. But I think Caesar or Tiberius, he has records of invasions in Britain against the Iron Age people and how he took over 20 or 30 Iron Age settlements because they were so easily to fight against and to attack, just because the Iron Age people weren't as smart when it came to weaponry and defense. So the Iron Age people either had to kind of adapt to the Roman way or fight against them, and most of the time they didn't usually win because the Romans had obviously a lot more improved weaponry and strategic military ideas.
Before we go down that road, you talked about excavating settlements, right?
Yes, yeah.
What archaeological evidence have you been able to dig out which has been able to make you make conclusive agreement in terms of their economic activities?
Okay, so Reese, actually, at the moment, I'm working on a site that has Iron Age and Roman activity on it. So you can tell how the people lived or what kind of people lived there by the kind of pottery you find, the kind of animal bones you find, so you can see what kind of animals they were eating. So if they were eating pig and stuff like that, that means that they had a lot of money to buy pigs to raise them and breed them and eat them. And the pottery in the Iron Age it's not as good quality as, let's say, Roman pottery. So the Iron Age pottery I commonly find is black kind of burnish ware with bits of shell, broken bits of shell inside. So it's very brittle and breaks very easily. I haven't seen that, like, lots of different types of Iron Age pottery, but I come across the same black shelly ware basically, and it's basically the most common Iron Age pottery, which means they were just, you know, common people, like poor to middle class. And you see a lot of cow and sheep bones nearby in ditches.
Okay. So you mean to tell me that if the Iron Age or the pottery of the Iron Age of Britain was rough and that of the Romans was smooth or fine, isn't that an indication that the Romans were advanced?
Definitely, yeah. So when they came over, I kind of imagine the Iron Age people would think, wow, these people are amazing. They have all these new techniques and how to, you know, in making pottery and making weapons, you know, it's kind of like amazing. I would think it's amazing to see such, you know, they would think it's like magical, you know.
Yeah. It really must have been something very amazing to witness.
Because imagine if that was you, you know, you were making iron weapons, you're making pottery that's, you know, in your surrounding resources you have. I mean, in the UK, it's just countryside, there's, you know, and rivers, there's not much around. And then you see these people come in with all this armor that looks amazing, and the weaponry and the way they, you know, interact with other people, and you'll probably think, wow, I'm scared, you know, they're going to take over. Or
they were like the Wakandans of the time.
Or you would try and adapt to their way of living and try and become like them, you know, to improve yourself.
Definitely. So what about trade? Did these people do any trade or any form of trading?
Yes, definitely. So trade links developed in the Bronze Age, and beforehand provided Great Britain with numerous examples of continental craftsmanship. So like swords especially were imported, copied, and often improved upon the natives. So like swords and daggers were a significant import around, so from Europe, because I guess if they didn't have the resources, they would, you know, trade with what they had, you know, with better weapons in Europe. But they did have kind of trade centers appearing in the Mediterranean as well. But it's like the Romans, you know, they would have brought a lot of things over that they would have used or learnt from them. And nearby would have been Germany and France, where they could trade.
Lee?
Yes.
Did the Romans invade or they came in peacefully? What does the archaeological record suggest?
I mean, I can only say what I've kind of come across, because I'm not an expert, but from what I've seen, so quite a few years ago, I saw a site where you could see like ring ditches, like a circular ditch, which where roundhouses used to be, where Iron Age people lived. And they would, you know, you would have circle ditches quite close to each other. So you would have a couple of houses, like huts, next to each other, like a little kind of tribe, I guess. And then you'd look down about 20 meters, and there was a Roman garden with bricks and stone. So, in my eyes, that either the Iron Age people and the Roman people were living next to each other, or when the Romans came over, they would have thought, "Oh, this is a good place to live because Iron Age people are living here, so we're going to take over." And then, then the Iron Age people would have either gone to a major settlement to kind of live there and take refuge, or kind of said, "Look, we're not here to fight. You can live here." You know, that's the evidence I've seen, that they're basically living next door to each other.
I mean, what can you tell us about the tribes that were living in the islands of Britain? The tribes.
So the kind of people that were living in the tribes.
Yes.
So an average roundhouse, say an average hut where a family would live, they would have usually an enclosure nearby with their animal stock, cows, pigs, sheep, dogs, not to eat. Obviously, they would have them as pets. And in the roundhouse, you would have in the center the main fire pit where they would cook their meals, keep warm, and then inside the roundhouse they would have straw beds for sleeping in. So like that would be a basic family in the Iron Age period. They would have a roundhouse, and if they were part of a tribe, they would have more roundhouses with their neighbours. Often, they would have their grandparents in one hut, and themselves in another hut, or a friend in another hut. Although the average death rate in the Iron Age periods, I believe, is between like 10 and 25. So if you got past 10 years old, you would usually make it to about 25 years old, but women would possibly have a lower death rate because of death during childbirth. And then men. So,
are you suggesting that some of these women could have died during giving birth?
Oh, definitely. Because obviously the medical knowledge wasn't there, and it was just more frequent that those kind of things would happen in that period. So the female.
This also takes the female's what?
The female death rate would be lower than the men's, but at a certain point in the Iron Age, towards the end, I think when there was more battles and fighting going on, the male death rate comes down again to 25 because a lot of them died in battle.
I hear you. This must have been quite a difficult time to live.
Definitely.
When you were doing these excavations, Lee, did you happen to come across any archaeological evidence that could have led you to say that these people were into farming or hunting? Have you ever come such archaeological artifacts? Or
definitely. I mean, the site I mentioned, where it's basically, it had a rectangular ditch enclosure, and then inside that were roundhouses where people were living. And then usually in that, their settlement, they would have an enclosure for animals to keep. And, usually you'll have ditches as well inside this enclosure that will be filled with animal bone, like jaw bones and leg bones with butcher marks. So you could see that, they must have been eating this certain animal. And then we can take it to a specialist and they can tell us if it was a cow or sheep or pig or whatever. And then we know what kind of diet these people had. And I mean, that was their main source of food, was making sure they had livestock and farming. And obviously we also do sampling of the soil, which then we can get an environmental analysis of that period as well. So if we take soil samples from a ditch, an Iron Age ditch that we know is Iron Age with pottery and animal bone, we can then wash the soil in water to see if there's any grain or seeds or little animal bones or pottery, and then we can see what they were growing back then as well. Like it could be like wheat, for bread, to make bread, and
So during the Iron Age of Britain, these people had already started growing wheat.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, they really were advancing. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, but that was their main source, was growing crops and keeping animals so they could make bread, have meat, and then grow crops when they could,
Okay. I really understand. So, in the development stages, you also, here in Africa, we don't have the Bronze Age. We just have the Stone Age and then the Iron Age. But you guys have the Bronze Age, right?
Yeah, we have the Bronze Age and the Stone Age and Neolithic, Mesolithic, Roman. We have quite a lot of history that comes into Britain.
Okay, so the Iron Age ends with the coming or in the invasion of the Romans.
Yeah, so when the Romans left, eventually they basically ran out of money and they had to go back to Rome, and they couldn't sustain living in Britain anymore. The Iron Age people just kind of kept on living, basically. And there is.
So you're saying
Yes.
that the Romans just came for a short period of time, and then they had to leave.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Proceed.
So, like Julius Caesar, he took over Germany in the Gallic Wars, and then he got to London in Britain. We know that from his book or his diaries.
Okay.
And then after years, the Roman people started to move in, basically, and live here, because there is evidence archaeology-wise, with Roman villas, Roman bathhouses, basic Roman houses, Roman roads. So we know there was trade. I mean, I live in a small town that's a Roman town, which was used for trading, and
Okay.
and it's literally, there's one main road going straight through the town, which means that was kind of very Roman, a very straight road with trading posts and living areas. So I mean, I live in a Roman town. Obviously, at one point, London was very Roman. But yeah, they came
to date that settlement pattern still exists even now.
We can't see it, but we have a museum. That's a very small museum, which holds finds that were found over the years, like pottery and structures, like ceramics, building material, coins. We do have like Viking and Anglo-Saxon archaeology and history in a town as well. So it's a town that's been used for many, many years.
Okay. Thanks for that, Lee. Can we get to the belief systems of these people? What is the archaeological record? Did you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
I was talking about the belief systems of the Iron Age people of Britain.
So the religion, the kind of religious practices revolved around offerings and sacrifices, sometimes human, but more often involving ritual slaughter of animals or the deposition of metalwork and pottery. So with like Iron Age burials, you'll come across crouch burials, or the body will face north, south, or east to west. They would be buried with pots with food and the weaponry and jewelry to take on to the next life. They would they would believe in similar gods like the Romans would. They would believe in a god for fertility and in the sun.
How did these people bury their dead? Was it cremating, or to dig a grave?
They would do both. They would cremate and leave the ash in vessels and bury the vessels, and then sometimes they would bury the bodies in certain positions with grave goods. At the moment, I'm working on a site with possible Iron Age burial, and it's crouched, and I haven't actually dug the actual burial yet, but we know it's possibly Iron Age because it's got Iron Age pottery next to it and iron nails.
Okay.
But religion, to determine religion through archaeology is quite difficult, because it's usually people saying it's, what happened here is what I think it is. So it's all theory. It's just kind of what you think. We don't truly know.
Okay. You just basing your conclusions on the finds that you make.
Yeah, basically. So if you find a whole animal next to a body, you kind of think, well, that must have been a sacrifice when that person was buried to the gods, to the gods they were believing at that time, which was usually the sun, because the sun would help grow the crops.
Okay. From what I hear you saying, what you have been able to dig out, the settlements that you have excavated, what can you, or what have you thought about the demography of these people?
So during the later Bronze Age, there are indications of new ideas, influence in land use and settlement. So extensive field systems that were set out, and settlements were becoming more permanent and focused on better exploitation of the land.
What else can you tell us about these people, the Iron Age people of Britain?
So what I've actually experienced digging archaeology with Iron Age archaeology, it's very similar. So each time I've seen an Iron Age settlement, it's very similar to the last one. It's not very different. But then I've only found a couple of Iron Age sites, and the sites that I usually come across are the basic, enclosure settlements with a couple of roundhouses where people were living, and that only gives me an indication of how kind of maybe the poorer to middle class Iron Age people lived. So I don't know how the kings and chiefs lived.
Okay.
Possibly in hill forts.
So you mean the political stratification?
Yeah.
Or the social stratification.
Basically, yeah.
Okay. I think that was really a good time talking to you, Lee.
Thank you. That's great. Well, it's been great speaking to you as well.
Thank you. I'll see you next time.
That was Lee Baylis all the way from England, telling us a thing or two about the Iron Age of Britain. I hope you've learned something. For those who would want to follow him, he uses the Instagram handle or username Archaeology Times. Just type Archaeology Times in the search box and I'm sure it'll be the first thing to pop up. Follow him. That's where he usually posts most of his stuff. And remember to follow Zimculture podcast on all social media platforms. We are going to be bringing you more and more of archaeology, cultural heritage, and museum studies. See you next time.